This is the Bible reading for this week. The lectionary moves us from John's Gospel into Luke, and this is Luke 24, verses 13 to 35. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came and walked alongside them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of the women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued as if he would go further, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened to them on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. One of the real benefits of lockdown for Joy and myself is that we've started to walk a lot more and for longer distances than we have been used to. We try every afternoon to get out and have a good walk, maybe for as much as an hour. And it's working out at around 32 miles a week, 4.5 miles a day. Actually, sounds more impressive as a step count. That's more than 70,000 steps in a week. What we've really valued is getting out and about and even seeing parts of Romsey that we didn't know existed. It's definitely more pleasant when there are fewer cars around, especially if you have to step out into the road to make sure you're keeping the right distance from other people. And it's about walking that I want to talk today. Luke, in the reading we've just heard, tells us that Cleopas and the other disciple were heading to Emmaus, a 7-mile walk. It could well have been Cleopas's wife Mary, who could also well have been one of the women at the cross, who was the other disciple, and I'm going to work on that basis. The thing is, no one really knows where Emmaus is. There have been several locations, all different distances from the city. So we don't know, but we understand from Luke that that's where they were going, and it was going to be about 7 miles. I know that many of us can't get out at all during lockdown, but I want to suggest that we can use this story as maybe picture language for the road we're on at the moment. We have no idea where the end is. Perhaps we're walking it in confusion and maybe even despair. And we're all hoping that there will be something familiar at the end of it. So we're going to walk with Cleopas and Mary and Jesus. And we're going to look at three things. The fact that they were walking, that they welcomed Jesus to eat with them at the end of the walk, and then the experience transformed them to be witnesses. When you think about their walking, actually what they were doing was walking away from hope. They say to Jesus when he comes alongside, "Have you not heard about this, Jesus? Well, we had hoped." They'd invested so much of themselves and their belief and their expectations into all that Jesus had been doing. Remember, we're still in Resurrection Sunday, Resurrection Day, and it is... Remember that we're still in Resurrection Day. The lectionary doesn't want us to move away from that moment too quickly. So a fortnight ago, it was Easter. Last week we were with the disciples in the upper room. And today we jump in that story from John to Luke. And we continue again dwelling in some of the truths of that resurrection story. It seems an odd story in the first place. If the two are walking away from Jerusalem on the evening of the first Easter day, why are they so downhearted, as Luke tells us? Jesus was alive. Some of the disciples had already reported this. Surely they should be excited. The very best of the good news is alive in Jerusalem, and they are walking away from hope. They are hopeless. What's the background to their lack of belief, the background to their misery? Well, for them, God's great plan was to redeem Israel. They'd been certain that God was with Jesus as he healed and taught, but that belief and that hope had come crashing down at the crucifixion. We had hoped. Carries such a weight of disappointment in it. Even some people's stories about the resurrected Christ hadn't penetrated their disappointment. If God's chosen messenger could be crucified, how would Israel ever be liberated from oppression? Well, Jesus joins them and asks them what's got them so worked up as they walk home. And then takes the opportunity to rehearse for them the whole of Israel's story, the sweep of God's plan through the patriarchs, Abraham, Moses, and others, through the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and many more, and then what Jesus himself has done. He tells them they're slow to believe and invites them to re-enter the resurrection story for themselves. As they walk along, he turns their "we had hoped" story into "and now we understand, we think" story. Luke puts Jesus' words as, "Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" You see, Jesus walked with them in their disappointment and their lack of hope. I wonder if that's a word for today for some of you. If so, Jesus is the one to whom you can give your disappointment and lack of hope. God's salvation plan is bigger than lockdown, bigger than coronavirus, and you and I are invited to enter it for ourselves. So they walked, and they walked, and they arrived in Emmaus. And as they get there, Jesus makes as though he's going to carry on walking, but they invite him in. And it might be helpful to understand a little bit about timing here. When Cleopas and Mary say it's nearly evening, the day is almost over, for the Jews their day would have ended at sunset, so evening would be our afternoon when the main meal was eaten. You see, that still gives time later in the story for Cleopas and Mary to hurry back to Jerusalem in order to share the good news with the disciples. But as they arrive in Emmaus, the responsibility of hospitality is paramount. It was such a given in those days that you were a good host. You invited people to be your guest. And so they invite Jesus to stay with them instead of carrying on into nighttime. Somehow then, just like all of his resurrection appearances, something about the resurrected Christ has kept them from recognizing him. He's physically with them, but transformed. Then, in a deeply personal moment of breaking bread together, they see, they understand, there's a revelation of who this is, and he disappears. Isn't it lovely how a meal is used as a way of revealing something significant about God? That should say something about how you and I can take a simple act like breaking bread and in it let God come to us. Luke's not writing a communion story. It's a revelation story, but it's rooted in that great act of breaking bread to share with others. One of the most commonplace things we do, and yet for God, one of the great moments where he comes and reveals himself to us. Remember that this is the end of a long walk, a rehearsal of all God's intentions for his people as Jesus has explained the story, and a conversation that restores Jesus to central place in their hopes. And all of that before the revelation of who this really is. Typically of Jesus, an invitation to a family meal is turned on its head. He becomes the host, breaking the bread and bringing with it a new experience in his presence. This is no longer Cleopas and Mary taking pity on a stranger. Everything changes as they see Jesus for who he is and recognize in that his invitation to find faith again. Wherever we are on this road, and at every mealtime, Jesus comes to us, filled with energy and vitality and possibility and the joy of resurrection. But the onus is on each one of us to invite him to stay, to experience the ordinary things of life alongside him, to have our eyes opened to a deeper truth of God's love for us and for the whole world. So Cleopas and Mary have walked, they've welcomed Jesus and discovered themselves welcomed in the process. And then they become witnesses. And the simple thing to say about that is that it is the resurrection that changes everything. When they left Jerusalem, they were without hope, trying to work out how God's great salvation plan could have broken down so dramatically. We had hoped, they told Jesus. Perhaps that means we can all draw heart from understanding that our hopes are given substance by the resurrection. Cleopas and Mary dash back to Jerusalem, and we get the sense that their urgency to do that, they got up and returned at once, means maybe even the washing up never got done. What had transformed them? It was meeting the risen Jesus. But more importantly, the realization that the resurrection had changed everything. This wasn't the Jesus they had known before. This was the resurrected Christ, and they returned as witnesses to Jerusalem to tell their story. And I wonder, as they went, what they rehearsed their story, and they wondered how they would be received by the other disciples, and yet arrive and burst in, and they want to tell the story, but they are met by a barrage of words from the others who say, it's true, we know it's true now, he's even appeared to Simon. Funnily enough, no mention of the women who Luke tells us went to the tomb first. And previously, all we'd known about Peter was that he'd left the tomb wondering what on earth was going on. The crucial thing is that Cleopas and Mary come back testifying to what they've experienced. I wonder what your testimony about Jesus looks like this Easter 2020, in the middle of all we're going through. Are you still hopeless? Are you still looking at a long road with no clear end? Or maybe you've met Jesus in a new way and need to tell someone. The truth is, of course, that we don't like the idea that all of us are called to be witnesses. Maybe this will help. These are some words from a writer called David Lowes on a blog called Working Preacher. And he says this: we bear witness to things that are important to us all the time. We bear witness to the great movies or television programs we've seen and want others to enjoy. We bear witness to the accomplishments or failures of our sports teams. We bear witness to the important events in our families and work lives. We bear witness, that is, tell somebody about the things that matter to us all the time. He continues, it's not really all that different when it comes to faith. Bearing witness is nothing more than saying where you think God is at work in your life and the world. We bear witness all the time. We're just not used to thinking about it in terms of our faith. What can you bear witness to at the moment? I guarantee there are people who would love to hear it. They may even say, it's true. We know for ourselves. Amen.